A Legacy of Violence number 12 ends the series with Nick learning his true place in the killer's plan. Unfortunately, that knowledge now forces Nick to make a deadly choice. We're going to talk about it in our review right here in 3. Welcome back to Comical Opinions. This is our review of A Legacy of Violence number 12 from Mad Cave Studios. We're going to talk about what happened in the last issue, what happened in this issue, what we liked, what we didn't like, and how the whole thing wraps up. Before we get started, please like, share, comment, subscribe, hit that bell for notification. Your attention is greatly appreciated. Make sure you stay tuned to the end for the final score. Let's talk about the credits. This issue is written by Cullen Bunn with art, colors, and the main cover art done by Andrea Muti, and the letters are by Russ Woot. Before we dig into the main issue, let's recap what happened in issue number 11. Nick and Hector were chasing after the sheriff because the sheriff kidnapped Sarah and delivered Sarah to the killers. That wound up in a couple of car crashes where they're now running around inside the jungle shooting at each other. Eventually, Nick kills the sheriff, but Nick doesn't find out until this issue that the sheriff also killed Hector. Meanwhile, Casey is visiting an elderly patient in the hospital, unaware that all this chaos is going on about a mile or two or so away. And in the course of the conversation, we find out this old man is asking some really weird, creepy questions. We cut away back to a nurse that's out by the nurse's station, and then we come back. We find out that she's gone, the old man is gone, and there's blood on the floor. So now something has happened, presumably taking Casey down to wherever the killers are hiding out. Now we begin with A Legacy of Violence number 12, which is the end of the maxi series. Nick is running around the jungle trying to find Hector, doesn't realize that Hector's been killed by the sheriff, but he finds his body and says, well, okay, we've still got to find Sarah because she's been kidnapped and taken somewhere. When he heads back out to the main road, the villagers who had been following them now believe that Nick is part of this chaos and they want to burn him down just like everybody else. He says, stay back, I've got a gun. He shoots out their tire from their truck. He hops in his truck and he heads back to the hospital. When he gets back to the hospital, he looks for Casey, and the nurse tells him that Casey's disappeared with the old man who was the patient and there's blood on the floor. She doesn't know what to do. Nick says, just find some help and I'll go look around. And he finds that large metallic door that always seems to be locked is now unlocked. He goes through the door, and as he's taking the steps, he's replaying in his mind what he believes has happened from his childhood when he saw that old black and white film regarding Unit 731 and the ugly, despicable, horrific Nazi medical experimentation that was going on during World War II. As that memory is replaying in his mind, he now remembers or recalls that his grandparents made a deal with some person, to help Nick block out those memories in his mind. But what they didn't realize is that person, whoever it was, locked the memories away, but also put a timer on it so that eventually when that timer was up, all that darkness and evil that Nick witnessed as a small child would now come forth and blossom and help him mentally ascend to become whatever he was meant to be in the eyes of the Third Reich. Then Nick heads down the steps into the basement of the hospital where he finds Sarah's tied up. Casey is standing there in front of the killer with this weird skull mask, and the old man who was pretending to be a patient is there as well. And they get into this long argument, but the killer is sort of goading Nick to saying, okay, now the timer's up, and now you can unlock all the evil that is within you, and you can take your place as becoming the best of us, the best killer, the best, I guess, Nazi psycho that the world has ever seen, and you are the culmination of years worth of work. Casey grabs a scalpel and stabs the killer. I don't know why they didn't do that multiple issues ago, but okay. The old man tries to stop Casey. She knocks him down, unties Sarah. The two of them escape. When the old man tries to grab her, she pokes her thumbs into the old man's eyes and puts him down for the count. And then Nick is now in a battle with the killer with the skull mask, but he doesn't want to necessarily fight him because he feels that darkness welling up inside of him. He feels like the brainwashing that occurred when he was a small boy has now taken effect, and everything is just turning into chaos. Meanwhile, the villagers have caught up to the hospital and they're dousing it in gasoline and setting everything on fire. The issue ends with Sarah and Casey getting away, but Nick is now inside with the killers, and the whole place is ablaze, and that pretty much puts an end to that legacy of violence, if you want to put it like that. And that's where we end the issue and the maxi series. What do we like about this issue? Well, there are certainly big chunks of it that go a long way towards explaining what's up with Nick. Why is he acting weird or sort of having trouble getting a grasp on reality? And what is it that happened to him when he was a small boy? This issue explains a lot of that. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And that also explains why he seems drawn to Unit 731, why he's kind of having these delusional voices in his head telling him to move in certain directions. And that helps to kind of bring a capper and a close to the issue. Plus, this definitely puts an end to the long gestating Nazi brainwashing experimentation. So, and there's definitely some urgency as well when the villagers are trying to catch up to Nick, and Nick is trying to find Sarah and Casey, and now the villagers are burning the hospital down. You get a lot of high pacing in the story and the progress of the issue as it moves to a final conclusion. What didn't we like about this issue? It's the same consistent problem that we've had with multiple issues throughout this maxi series. Civilians or people who are not Nick, who are not part of whatever happened to him as a child, just seem to be standing around as the killer is directing people to kill each other, or the killer moves to kill people with a scalpel or a knife or some kind of bladed instrument. People are just not reacting as though the killer has some kind of hypnotic trance like power over them. And it doesn't make any sense, especially when Casey, for example, is like screaming, help us, save us. And she's just standing there. It doesn't make any sense. You're sort of meant to believe that somehow this ancient Nazi leftover killer is so charismatic or has some sort of weird hypnotic ability, but that never bears out in any place. So what you get is you had a lot of movement and atmosphere in the beginning of the maxi series, but you had a lot of scenarios and scenes where characters were just sort of standing around and letting themselves be mutilated, and it doesn't make any sense. So it all plays out as if this is a 12-issue maxi series. Really, if you peel back the layers and look at the core of what actually happened, this really should have been a 6-issue. There was way too much fluff and things not happening and inconsistent pacing for stuff that didn't need to be there. People just standing around letting themselves be killed. People just standing around allowing themselves to be killed or killing other people. There's just too much fluff. Lots of mood and atmosphere, but that only goes so far. Things needed to start happening, and Bunn just took way too much time letting things happen, or he drew it out to 12 issues when it really should have been 6, and he just wound up filling it in with a lot of fluff and stuff that was effectively useless. Let's talk about the art. Andrea Mutti's water painterly style is the absolute highlight of the series and the only thing that's kept it going. Mutti has an eye for doing gore without being gratuitous, with getting the shock and the fear on people's faces and allowing the emotion to come through. So that mood and atmosphere that is actually the strong point of the series is in large part due to Mutti's artistic style. Final thoughts. What do we think about A Legacy of Violence number 12 from Mad Cave Studios? It brings the maxi series to a close. You definitely get a lot of answers. There is some satisfaction level in knowing that there's a proper conclusion to Nick's journey, and also there is some redemption or saving for Casey and Sarah, and the whole thing just kind of wraps up as you would expect. On the downside, what you realize is there's not a huge complex idea in this story. It's a 12-issue maxi series that when you look back at the sum total of all the issues combined, there was so much wasted time, so much fluff, and the scenes of lingering mood and atmosphere with people standing around either being told to kill somebody with no resistance or being killed with no resistance. And the whole thing sort of makes sense at its core level, but in execution didn't make a whole lot of sense. And this is really much too long for what it needed to be. Therefore, we're going to give A Legacy of Violence number 12 from Mad Cave Studios a 6.8 out of 10. In the grand scheme of things, there was a lot of good mood and atmosphere, and there's a good idea at its heart. But this, generally speaking, from an execution perspective, was a miss for Cullen Bunn, and that's too bad. What do you think about horror stories that play on the idea of Nazi experimentation? Do you find interest in those, or do you prefer your horror to be a little bit more traditional in the sense of monsters and ghosts and ghouls? Let us know in the comment section. Otherwise, please stay tuned through the outro for the next review.